Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Design Beyond Pixels. This is a series of podcasts that will allow design leaders across the US and Europe to discuss topics completely chosen by them. Today, I'm joined by Richard Banfield. Richard, thanks so much for joining me today. Can you please just give us a short introduction into yourself?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me, Matt. Really honored to be here. I'm a recovering CEO and design leader. I also have had the honor of writing several books, which really were journalistic in nature. I was able to go out and talk to design and product leaders and gather their thoughts and put those thoughts onto paper and publish those books. So, although my name is on the cover of those books, they really are the collections of other people's ideas. I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. Right now, I'm VP of Design Leadership at a company called Knapsack. We are a design systems platform, and we deliver these platforms to companies like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, let's see, GSK, lots of other enterprise level customers. So yeah, that's the work that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks very much for the intro, Richard. Now, for those of you who don't know, haven't seen any previous episodes, this podcast is going to be slightly different to many you may have seen out there, as I'm giving my guests the full ownership of what we discuss, the topics they want to cover. Richard, I obviously gave you the task of just picking some topics that you wanted to discuss today. So can you just please share with the viewers what we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, I picked the topics of team health and then also personal and professional health as it relates to that. So, the work that I've done has given me an opportunity to talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of companies of all sizes, whether they be startups or enterprises. And what I see being the area of biggest improvement, where they can have the biggest impact, is changing the way that they measure and understand the team dynamics. And ultimately, that boils down to this kind of broad concept of team health. Like, how are people showing up? Why are they showing up? What is it that's motivating them? Why are they excited to do that work? What are the relationships like within that? So that's the key thing. And then obviously it has to start with the leader's attention to their own health, both personal, physical health, their mental health, their maybe even spiritual, emotional health. How are they showing up as leaders? Because that generally sets the tone for the rest of the team.
No, I think they're both very relevant topics and have been for certainly the last couple of years. I think that we've obviously as a world gone through some incredibly tough challenges in the last couple of years for sure. Obviously with the pandemic and everything, I think there's obviously been peaks and troughs of market being in a very good place versus hiring market and just job situation being in a very bad place right now. I think they're really relevant topics, but that aside, I think they should be focused on no matter what the situation. I think it's important. I think team health is often, it's probably very much overlooked in terms of how, this can actually be measured and how it can be implemented into a team dynamic. I think many other things are measured in terms of performance and things like that, but overall health and culture, I think, is something that gets overlooked more often than not.
Because it's difficult.
Exactly.
These things they're incredibly hard things to either incorporate or maintain or nurture within an organization. So leaders much prefer when things are good. I call these leaders the party hosts. So they show up when the company has raised a lot of money. Things are looking good. The market is trending in the right direction, and they show up and they say, "Wow, look at what I did! Look at what I created." Really, what they're doing is just handing out cocktails at the party. They're not changing anything specifically. So that the party's already going. The mood's already there. The culture's already there, and they're just taking advantage of that, claiming credibility for that, or credit for that. And really, the true measure of a leader is what happens when things aren't going well, right? What happens when you're not in the room to hand out cocktails? Does the team still feel like they're bonded together? Do they feel like they can find their own purpose and find their own motivations to be there every day for this difficult work that they have to do? And ultimately, we are going to be measuring the success of both the team and the leader in these moments where things aren't going particularly well. So right now we're experiencing that, right? In evolutionary terms, this is called punctuated equilibrium. We've got periods of stasis or general, how should we say, stability, but then it's followed by periods of dramatic change. And right now, we've got this dual problem of companies having to cut the people that they overhired during the times when things were really good. So during the pandemic, a lot of e-commerce and SaaS companies were doing well. They hired very, very aggressively, and now they're having to lay those people off. And also what's happening at the same time is we're starting to start to see how AI is going to affect these jobs. And really, a lot of these layoffs may on the surface be considered as being a correction or a right sizing after those overhiring. But the reality is a lot of companies are actually planning for the addition of the efficiencies that they can gain from artificial intelligence. And so if they're laying off 30 or 40% of their staff, there's a good chance that they won't hire them back when things get good again. They are actually planning to make this a permanent part of the structure of these organizations. So that might not be good news if you're out there looking for a job. I apologize for being, you know, a bit doom and gloom here, but the opportunity, of course, is to reskill yourself and start thinking about how you can become part of that artificial intelligence revolution. Be, you know, just like, I mean, you can see I've got lots of gray hairs. I've been here for a long time. I was here during the .com. I had my first venture funded startup back then. And I've seen a lot of these waves, you know, the 2008 financial crisis, etc., COVID. These things will come and go, and being adaptable and being flexible and changing your skill sets to tune to what's happening in the world is going to be an important part of what people do right now.
No, I completely agree. I think AI has been a hot topic for certainly a number of years now. I think as you've said, and I think it's a little bit of a reality check for a lot of the industry right now, is that yes, I think there is certainly part of it, as you said, the correction of the overhiring situation, but are they ultimately just preparing for AI to take over a lot of the responsibilities that designers or anyone in that space really took over in that period?
Well, I mean, your podcast, the name of your podcast is really kind of pointing to that thing, and that is beyond pixel pushing is really where designers should be thinking. So, for example, there's a very real situation, a very real future where designers aren't pushing pixels at all. They're not spending time in Figma. They're not making the things that they used to be making, and the machines will be doing that for us. And we're actually seeing that in the design system world, where if you've got a workable design system and you've got all your components, you can just prompt that design system to give you a landing page, give you a product page, give you a workflow. And it's going to create 99% of what you need in that prototypical way that actually reduces any need to be in Figma or any need to be in Sketch or whatever the tool is that you're using. So we're seeing designers being essentially pushed out by the very things that they've been creating. So they, this is not supposed to be, a rant against Figma or anybody in that space, but really we should be spending less time in these design tools and more time solving the actual problems. But I get why Figma would want to have us spend more time in the tool, because that's how they're measured, right? They're like, hey, look, time on product or time on this page is a metric that they're measuring to understand their success. But really what it should be is the opposite way around. Like if my designer was spending a lot of time in Figma, I'd be scratching my head and saying, that's really not why I pay you. I pay you to solve problems, not to be pushing pixels. There are better ways to create systematized execution in the form of, say, a design system where I can get all those components ready, and then you can just tell those components what it is that you want them to do. Now, we're not quite there yet on many fronts. I think we're still in that transition phase. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get a little bit of hate on this particular topic from designers saying, well, designers will always be there. And sure, there is going to be a creative element of what we do in terms of making the things, making those elements. But let's be honest, you didn't get into design because you wanted to be in Figma. Most people who are using those tools today didn't even know that Figma was going to exist right now. Just as, that's the reality, they also don't know that in 10 years' time, there's going to be a whole new set of tools that they're going to use. And like I said, I've been around long enough to have seen, my designers say, well, I will never use anything except CorelDRAW or Photoshop,
Yeah.
and then they have to change, right? I worked for InVision. InVision was like the standard.
Yeah.
Everybody was using that at one point. Now InVision doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think these are really important lessons for all of us. And I don't want to come across as sounding like the old guy who knows better. But
Yeah.
when you have seen cycles come and go, and when you've seen tools come and go, what you realize is that this isn't really a case of being loyal to a particular tool set. This is being loyal to the art of making things work
Yeah.
in service of whatever that company is doing. And this isn't, I use the word art, but this isn't art. It's not
Yeah.
art school, right? We're not creating things
Yeah,
so that people
exactly.
can, like start thinking about a different, philosophical mindset. We're doing things in service of what it is that the company is trying to do.
Yeah.
And that has to be the priority of the designer, is
Yeah.
spending time solving problems. And then ultimately we're going to get to a point where they can start writing really good prompts to get those design systems to generate the flows, the pages, the sequences that are ultimately going to work for us. Because we as humans, we have a kind of an arrogance about us where we're like, oh yeah, we know better, we know how to design the perfect landing page. But as we have seen in the homogeneousness of all the websites out there, like we're turning this stuff into, really just like a copy and paste world
Yeah.
where every single website looks exactly the same. And maybe we need AI to kind of prompt us and say, well, maybe there's a better way to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe if we change this thing, that thing, we'd get a better outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as you said, I think there probably will be some controversial opinions on this topic. I think that AI is, I think it's threatened a lot of industries to replace full roles, or at least part of roles. But as you said, I think as much as it's a bit of a bad place at the minute for a lot of people in terms of jobs, I think if people do have the time and have the have the drive and ability to focus on developing their skill set within AI, AI topics, learning how it potentially could evolve into their day-to-day role, and look into that right now. I think that's going to
Well, this
benefit.
might be controversial, but I don't
Yeah.
think that they have a choice. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think,
Yeah.
you say like if they have the time or if they have the motivation, or
Yeah.
I don't think they have a choice. I think that just as, when design switched from being something of a graphic design
Yeah.
story to being a digital design story, there really wasn't an option. I mean, you could have
Yeah. That's
stayed
true.
a graphic
Yeah.
designer, but I don't know what that world would have looked like for you if you're
Yeah.
only doing that thing.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is a sea change that we're going to have to react to. And
Yeah.
the reason why I mention this is because my obsession with team health is giving people the agency to be able to go and adapt to these new things is really
Yeah.
important. So if you're a design leader or a product leader or an engineering leader, and you are looking after or guiding a team to the next stage, the key thing here is for you to give them the space to be able to go and adapt to these
Yeah.
new technologies. Um, my as you know, my because of the work that I've done, the books that I've written,
Yeah.
my personal preference is to be experimental, right? I'm a big fan of experimentation, whether it's something like a design sprint or
Yeah.
something a lot less formal than that. Get out there and try stuff. Be willing to take these technologies and use them in different ways. We just did
Yeah.
a project with Kia, the automotive company, and they said, look, we don't really know exactly how AI is going to affect our design process, but
Yeah.
we just want to start experimenting with that. And I thought that was
Yeah.
a really healthy way to approach
Yeah.
this. We spent a week just bringing all the different tools to the design teams, and I think the really amazing and maybe surprising thing for me was it wasn't just the designers that benefited; it was the engineers. Like there
Yeah.
were engineering folks who were part of this program that had no design skills whatsoever. And they were really, really blossoming as creators and as makers because they were taking tools that maybe are a little bit more democratized. Like you don't
Yeah.
need to be a Figma expert or an After Effects expert to
Yeah.
make a design. You were able just to use your logic as a human being, say like, this is what I'd like to create. These are the things that I'm
Yeah.
interested in, and then tweak those. And I think those language skills that these engineers had made this a lot more democratic. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
the designs, the the car designs that these engineers were coming up with were in many ways superior to what the designers had done. And that was, I think, a surprise to everybody. We're like, wow,
Yeah.
we didn't realize you were such a good designer. We're like, well, it's not so much about design skills with a capital D. It's about not being restricted by the lowercase design skills, which is like, I don't know how to use this program. I don't know how to use this application. So the team health aspect of this is super important, is that if you want to retain good talent, if you want to nurture good talent, and you want to make people feel welcome, you have to invest in these new technologies. It's not so much the technology, it's giving them the space to grow and to experiment and try new things. And that permission to go and try new things is that overarching cultural element that brings teams closer together and say, wow, we tried something new and it didn't work. Let's try something else. Oh, that worked. That give and take, that ability to go out and succeed and fail. Wow, that's a really strong bonding opportunity for teams.
Yeah. And I think it leads us quite nicely into something you wanted to cover off, was obviously the myth of predictability, as we were discussing before we jumped on.
Right.
I think you described it right. Why were people, or why were companies, producing go-to-market or launching new products before COVID and then the pandemic hit, if they were so good at predicting what was going to happen in the future? Now I think we're in a perfect scenario right now to go through that, right? I think AI is obviously challenging and democratizing a lot of the industries that we're working in. But why do you feel like predictability has become much more of a myth, or is a myth effectively in this world right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice as human beings to think that we can predict the future, right? We're all looking for safety. Ultimately, at a psychological level, we're looking for safety. Maybe that's because we had a traumatic childhood. Maybe that's because the economy keeps changing. Maybe because we just need to know that we feel secure and loved. But ultimately, we're looking for safety. And that safety is somewhat connected to our willingness to predict the future. So we like to speculate. We like to believe that based on our experiences in the past, that we can understand what's going to happen in the future. But as you just mentioned, I was working with companies who were writing 3-year roadmaps, product roadmaps. And launching those roadmaps in the early part of 2020, saying, this is what we're going to create. And I can tell you right now that by March, all of those roadmaps had been torn up and were dust, right? None of those things worked because the world had changed. Now, exactly to your point, if they were so good at predicting the future, then why were they spending so much time investing in 3-year roadmaps or these kind of predictable outcomes? And so what we've got to do in order to create real safety, true stability for a team, is to teach not predictability, but the ability to prepare for any future. Now, I cannot take any credit for this. This is an idea that has been made famous by Nassim Taleb, who wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. And Anti-Fragile is a concept that looks at how do you prepare so that you can be ready for any eventuality. And that's what I like to work around, especially with my teams. And if I'm doing this kind of team health work, is we're not going to predict the future. We're not going to try and say, well, this is going to be a big hit, or this is the thing that we have to do, but rather say, how do we prepare for these eventualities? What if these things don't work out the way we want, or they do work out even better than we expected? And as you can see, I'm wearing a hoodie with a peony. I originally painted this peony when my wife was very sick with cancer, and she was going through these big ups and downs of, the discovery of the cancer, the prognosis, the diagnosis, and then she would have these treatments and she'd go through remission, and then it would come back again. And what we noticed while we were going through these years of cancer treatments is that in our garden here in New England, I live just outside Boston, that the winters would kind of destroy all the flowers in our garden. And then, every spring they would just magically pop up, and they would come back even bigger and brighter and bolder than they had been the previous year. And we're like, wow, what a great symbol. So this peony has become a symbol for both myself and my family to show that, yes, things will go wrong and things will be bad, and the winter will come. Just as Game of Thrones predicted, winter is coming. And bad things happen. And bad things are, we don't want to predict that they will happen, but they will happen. And we're
Yeah.
in another election here in the States. So, we're expecting crazy things to happen.
Mm.
But being prepared, being the peony that says, well, I'm going to come back bolder and brighter and stronger after the deluge or after the storm or after the winter, that is a better way to create both emotional and mental health for individuals and for teams. And the way that you do that is start to look at how you think about the world. What is your mindset?
Yeah.
Do you hold on very tightly to a predictable future, or are you really wishing that your political candidate is going to win, or are you hoping that there won't be another pandemic?
Yeah.
Like, starting to question our fundamental beliefs guides us towards where we are seeking safety.
Yeah.
And if we can then unify the team around the relationships that we have with ourselves and with other people, we start to then understand that a lot of these choices are internal choices and not externalized
Yeah.
and expected from the outside world. So I don't need my candidate to win the election for me to be a happy person. I don't need the
Yeah.
pandemic not to return in order for me to maintain sanity.
Yeah.
So, looking inwards, a lot of this stuff is, by many people's measures would be kind of woo woo and maybe not appropriate for the office. But I actually disagree. I think that the more we lean into these psychological and emotional topics, the more likely we are to build teams that actually care about each other
Yeah.
and understand themselves to the point where they can weather the storm. So, understanding each other, spending time getting to know each other, understanding what triggers us, what sets us off and makes us
Yeah.
feel vulnerable and scared, and then being able to talk about that allows the team to bond and build the strength of character, the strength of will to be able to understand that, yeah, bad things are going to happen, but we're going to have to a way to deal with that. And then take those skills and weave those skills into the day-to-day planning. Like, well, how are we going to get through the next
Yeah.
month? Like, we do need some kind of plan. We can't have
Yeah.
nothing. But North Star metric type frameworks are really good for this, where you have an idea of what you want, but you really don't care how you get there. So the how is less important
Yeah.
than what it is that you're striving towards. So if you're striving towards a certain kind of value that you want to deliver to your customer, what does that look like? What does that, the vision of that look like? And what questions might you have about that? So, uh, the guy who started Pixar talks about this and says, it's less important to have a vision that tells you what the world is going to look like, but rather the questions that ask you what you want to do about that world that you want to create. And I think that's a super, super powerful way of
Yeah.
thinking of it. Is that instead of thinking the answers, instead of being a prediction machine, you become a curious machine. You
Yeah.
start to think about building frameworks where you can put questions in one end of the framework and you'll get answers out of the other side, like a design sprint. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is,
Yeah.
the scientific method. How can we experiment our way to a greater understanding or higher confidence,
Yeah.
and then use that as the input back into the system to create additional answers to questions? And really, this is the mindset: is become a question machine, become
Yeah.
a way of asking the world what it is that it wants from you through curiosity, through just this like series of really good questions. And I publish this a lot. Like, if you go to my Medium page, you'll find multiple articles just on questions. Like, what
Yeah.
questions should you be asking yourself? What questions should you be asking the team? As a leader, how can I insert questions into a conversation and then pull back and let the team figure out what the answers are? That's really
Yeah.
ultimately what leadership looks like, is that it's not so much pulling people towards a destination, but rather giving them the resources that they need that they can get there on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. I think obviously you made a lot of points in that. I think certainly one thing I wanted to cover was the emotional awareness within teams. I really resonate with that because I think it's a very undiscussed topic, and it's I think there's a lot of leaders that feel that their teams may have good cultures. I think culture is often thrown around. When people are looking for new roles, pretty much everyone I speak to always says, "Oh, I want a company with a great culture."
Mm.
Now that's a very generic topic, right? That's a very generic term, a great culture,
Yeah.
because culture can mean many, many different things. And I think that especially in the remote world that we live in now, where a lot of teams are distributed and things like that. I think culture um, has become, I think culture is defined or looks good on paper if people get along. People are quite content
Right.
and happy with their peers and colleagues and things like that. But I think there is potentially so much more, and I think that's the emotional parts, I think, are often missed from a remote working standpoint than if you are face to face and can meet
Oh
each
yeah.
other, because I think those emotional connections and those real relationships start to build in like random social settings, right? If
Totally.
you
Yeah.
I think if you're just out for a coffee, or you go for drinks with someone, or you go out for lunch, I think we've fallen into a trap of this, remote working. Every time you speak to your colleagues or leader or whoever it is, it's purely about work, or you have like a very not necessarily forced, but it is a little bit forced scenario where you might jump on Zoom team meeting and say, look, we're not going to discuss work, let's like have a coffee and just chat. I think it's a decent replacement, but ultimately I think, though, as I said, those real emotional and social connections are made much greater in the face-to-face world, the personal connection world, if you like.
Yeah, I mean that binary idea of whether we should be all remote or all in the
Yeah,
office is really just it's a media conversation. It's got
yeah,
nothing to do with reality. Like
yeah,
that's what the media would have you believe, is that you've got a black and white
yeah,
option here. But the reality is all of us are somewhere in between in that spectrum. There are 50 shades of gray when it comes to
yeah,
how we work and culture, and really it's the work of the team and the leaders to explore that and find out, what does our shade of gray look like? Don't have to just like, and I'm part of the problem as well, because when I was younger, I was like, well, what if, we did what this company did,
yeah,
and if we do what they do, then we would be able to achieve the same kind of outcomes.
yeah,
But we all know at some point we come to the realization that nobody's got the answers, right? They've got a version that we should look at and say, well, that's
yeah,
interesting. We can learn from that. But what we really need to do is create our own set of experiments where we
yeah,
can find out for ourselves what our shade of gray looks like. And
yeah,
that's really the core principle behind this cultural framework is, does the leadership give the team the space and the time to go and discover that on their own, or are they
yeah,
just absorbing it from anecdotes that they're being told about? Oh, well, we used to
yeah,
do this at our company.
yeah,
Spotify did that, so we have
yeah,
to structure our teams this way. And as we know, I made a movie called Squads with my team
yeah,
um, at InVision. Is that the Squads model was very fashionable for a while, and what the movie asks is, but does it work? Right? And we know
yeah,
now, in hindsight, that even Spotify turned their back on their own model.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
these are questions that are worth asking. Is that even the companies that are using
yeah,
these things and are having success with them, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be successful for you. So,
yeah,
being able to have the right open mindset,
yeah,
to use Carol Dweck's term, this open
yeah,
mindset is really important to learn, to constantly be asking questions, having leadership that's willing to allow us to go and ask those questions in a safe
yeah,
environment, and creating that psychological safety to say, oh, I've got a different way. I'd like to try
yeah,
something new. And that entire experience is something that leaders
yeah,
will, often battle to create, but when they do create it, when they can create psychological safety,
yeah,
magic happens. Absolutely,
yeah,
magical things start
definitely.
to happen. Companies
Yeah,
start to solve their own problems.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think again, this leads us very nicely into the next thing you wanted to cover, is the value of keeping things small, i.e. team,
Mm.
i.e. breaking other parts of process, other things into smaller parts or some smaller focus areas, let's say, to ultimately achieve the same goal. But how have you seen that done? How have you done that yourself
Mm.
before?
Yeah, so I think the reason why I like small is because it's again antithetical, right? It's kind of like a counterintuitive way to big business. Big
Yeah,
businesses tend to talk a lot about growth, scale. They talk about being too big to fail, having dominance.
yeah,
And yes, and especially in the US right now, I'm not sure what it's like in all countries, Western type cultures, but there is a bias towards monopolies, where the governments have turned a blind eye to monopolies, and they haven't been pushing the antitrust agenda as much as they have in the past. So companies got really big. You got like the Magnificent Seven, Amazon and
yeah,
Microsoft and Apple, and these companies really dominate their sector. But what we've noticed is that with big companies, you also inherit big problems, right? You have got much more complex tech stacks. You've got kind of a Frankenstein of sorts happening when it comes to adopting technologies and adopting processes. During this era, we went from being interested in agile to suddenly having a thing called safe agile, which was a disaster, right? Essentially, those processes were trying to reduce all the risk. Again, be predictable. Right? They were trying so hard to guarantee and speculate that there was one outcome that could be organized around, that they forgot the truth of the matter, and that is the world is unpredictable, and that it's going to throw chaos in there from time to time. And so all these organizations start to get so obsessed with reducing risk that they become bureaucratic in nature. And at some point, that bureaucracy becomes indistinguishable from sabotage. And that's really important, because the bigger you are, the more likely you are to have bureaucracy. And the more likely you are to have bureaucracy, the more likely it will start to sabotage itself. Like this is obviously not intentional. This is kind of like a consequence of bureaucracy. But the thing that's really surprising to me is how quickly that can happen. Right? You see something go wrong, and you're like, well, let's try and make that thing not happen again. And so you put a policy in place, or you buy a new SaaS tool that allows you to track that metric or something. And then next thing, you got 40 items in your stack. Right? Like, how did this happen? They got 40 SaaS products in your stack, or 100. There was one stat that I read that said for every employee, a company will have a SaaS product. So if you've got 100 employees, you'll have 100 SaaS products. That's mind-boggling. And so what we are doing is we're creating this complexity through size, right? So we're obsessed with growth, we're obsessed with scale. And what we hear is, oh, if it's scale, if it's growth that we want, then it also has to be big and complicated. But the truth is, when we look at companies like WhatsApp, Pinterest, Instagram, when they were in their infancy, before they were bought by whoever, in this case, mostly Meta, but before they were bought, those teams were really small, 20-something people. I think Pinterest was 19 people or something like that. And I'll ask you, and I'll ask anybody who's listening to this podcast, has your experience of Pinterest improved or degraded since they got bought? Has WhatsApp's feature list increased to add more value, or reduced your value, your trust of the system since Meta bought them? And the answer is always going to be it's gone down, right? It's always gone. When they went from 20 people to 2,000 people or 20,000 people, I don't know how many people work at these organizations right now, but no value was added. The only thing that was added was cost and complexity, which the end user has to pay for now. So now I have to pay for a premium version of the product so that I can pay for the salaries of those people that are working there. But no increase in value. So size is really an important conversation here, because not only is it the team size that matters, you can be obviously a lot more agile with a small a lot more flexible, a lot more adaptable. Hey, when COVID hits, it doesn't mean the end of the company. It just means we got to change something. If AI comes along, it doesn't mean we have to like restructure the whole business and lay off 40% of the company. We just have to reorganize ourselves slightly. So from a team structure point of view, it's important to stay small. But then also in terms of the size of the work, like the chunks of work, the scope of the work, the shape of the work needs to be small. So working in smaller cycles allows you to avoid those big hits that come from the unpredictable things. Working in small chunks of work allows you to work on one thing at a time. So being really focused on doing one thing and then moving on to the next thing and then the next thing allows everybody to be present. And when you're present, you do more with less, right? So you can actually achieve more in a short amount of time. And you're also able to frame things accordingly. Say like, this is important, but it's maybe not that important. Maybe we can delay that. Whereas a big company with a big initiative, it's always important, right? It's always the highest priority. It's like that leader, leader who's running that particular division or that group or that initiative, that is the highest priority. And we're going to fight tooth and nail to make that work. So small projects or small chunks of work with small teams and small decisions. In other words, making lots of
Yeah.
small decisions instead of having to make big decisions. All of that leads to a higher, I won't say velocity of work because I don't
Yeah.
really believe in measuring velocity
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
as a metric, but a higher delivery value in terms of health. Like
Yeah.
everybody feels really good about the work.
Mm.
You're delivering value to the customer.
Yeah.
You're able to do all the things you say you're going to do. You don't have to have the morale, crushing things like laying off 40% of
Yeah.
the team. A lot of benefits for team health come from being small. And like I said, there are enough examples out there,
Yeah.
WhatsApp, Pinterest,
Yeah.
Instagram are really good examples of companies that were very small and achieved some
Yeah.
magnificent outcomes
Yeah.
without having to, take on big risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. I think I was speaking to Bob Baxley was one of the guests that we had on, or I had on previously. He made a very similar point. He was obviously at Apple earlier stage, but I think he said, the team that ultimately built the iPhone and ultimately built the Mac originally were incredibly small teams. And he made a very similar point to you, is that I think the talking about designers specifically, look, don't get me wrong. I think we all can both agree there are some incredibly talented designers and people in design that work at the Metas of the world, the Amazons and things like that.
Yeah.
But I do think, as you said, where the scope of work has become so large, there is a massive fixation on that, and I think that's everyone I speak to at the bigger companies that may not be titled as corporate businesses often do have a lot of bureaucracy, often do have a lot of hierarchy, and that provides issues with culture, and that provides issues with people feeling as though they're actually having impact on whatever they're
I
working
think I think
on.
it's a really good point,
Yeah.
Matt. If you're a designer and you're on a team of 50 designers working on like a single landing page,
Yeah.
or like I interviewed this, and you're a recruiter, so you know
Yeah.
the story. I interviewed this woman who said that she had worked at one of the largest banks in the
Yeah.
world, and she had designed a certain part of the product experience. And I asked her to show me what she had done, like specifically what
Yeah.
she had done, and she had literally designed a button. Right, that was all
Yeah.
the only impact
Yeah.
or contribution she had made to that work of dozens and dozens of
Yeah.
designers, and that's not her fault. Like
Yeah.
she wanted to do more, but she
Yeah.
was unable to do that because there were just so many people involved.
Yeah.
And I think if you're a designer or creator or an engineer, if you're involved in the making of things, as the team size increases, you lose your agency to be able to have impact. And that is a big deal, because if you are looking to create creative things, and that is part of your generative
Yeah.
experience of life, then you're going to be disappointed on a big team. So, hey, you might say, well, I'm joining a big company that does provide me with stability, but know as well that you may not have the same kind of impact on a team of 20 or 30
Yeah.
or 40.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've definitely witnessed a flood in the market over the last 12, 18 months with the fan companies. Obviously, there's been big layoffs. They're still occurring. I think there's lots of
Yeah.
designers that unfortunately have been put in a position that they are unfortunately out of work from being there. Now, I think there's always this debate. I see it a lot on LinkedIn recently about obviously there are a lot of people struggling to find positions at the minute. For whatever reason or not, the people from the fan companies often take priority for hiring managers. They're like, all these guys are on the market now, let's grab them whilst they're still there and things like that. But
Yeah.
As I said, there's no doubt there are some super talented people that work there, but there is also some super talented designers that do not work or have never worked at fan companies that ultimately have had much wider impact on the products they've worked on.
Yeah.
But just because they don't have the big names on their CV, they're not necessarily getting noticed.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22.
Yeah.
You have this, at least in the time that I've been in the design world, which is kind of going on 30
Yeah.
years now, is that the really big companies and the really small company, like really small, like 2, 3, 4
Yeah.
people, ultimately are the kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And there's very little in the middle. It's kind of like
Yeah.
a desert in the middle where, at least in the past, there were small agencies, 10,
Yeah.
20, 30 people working in an agency kind of environment or building products.
Yeah.
The market just doesn't sustain that as much as it used to. That
Yeah.
used to be cool. It used to be cool to
Yeah.
be in
Yeah.
an agency. It used to be cool to be a part of a startup.
Yeah.
It's difficult to be part of those things right now. I think that'll change. I don't think that'll.
Yeah.
It's probably just a phase we're going through. But
Yeah.
again, it's something to be aware of. It's you're certainly going to do a lot more creative work on a smaller
Yeah.
team, and I given how much time we've got, we could go on this particular topic forever. But I think that
Yeah.
the key thing, the key insight here is that going back to mental health, going back to team health,
Yeah.
going back to your professional health is we are now living in an era where people are a lot more thoughtful and mindful about where they work and with
Yeah.
whom they work. And I think that's great. I think it's good that we can say,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I'm not going to go and live in, the center of London or downtown
Yeah.
New York or whatever, and have to get a high paying job just so
Yeah.
I can pay rent and feed the cat.
Yeah.
But now I can actually, maybe move to a smaller town where the
Yeah.
cost of living is lower. I can move to a different country, maybe. I can work remotely. I have more choices, and I'm going to be a lot more discerning about who
Yeah.
I'm going to work with. I'm going to be discerning about, the purpose of that company and its reason to be. And I'm going to look at its values, and I'm going to look at its principles, and I'm going to take note of what that is. And I think that's interesting. I don't know how it's all going to balance out. I'm very, very
Yeah.
curious to see how this is going to wash out. But yeah, we certainly live in interesting times, as the
Yeah.
Irish would say.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, look, I mean, in terms of going back to the health part, um,
Mm.
looking at burnout. Now, burnout was, I think, obviously, I think the whole, the actual whole understanding, or at least the acknowledgement of mental health and burnout being a genuine, concept, a genuine thing that is happening or has certainly started
Mm.
to really happen since the pandemic. I would say I think that's when it's become much more noticeable and much more acknowledged globally.
Yeah.
How how can people, in your opinion, how do you avoid it? But also, how would you, with your teams, how would you help them if they were experiencing that, or how would you, help prevent the burnout for them?
Yeah, I think if you are burnt out and you're experiencing an extreme version of that, it's going to take some time. It took
Yeah,
me about, I'd say, close to 18 months to, feel like
yeah,
I had my mojo back. It's a serious thing. It's
yeah,
people joke about it. They say, well, you're just not cut out for the work, or you don't
yeah,
really, you don't have the character for this. But
yeah,
that's total bullshit. Like we've
yeah,
we've asked people to work uh, pretty much nonstop in a way that's completely unsustainable.
yeah,
And by nonstop, I mean like we've given them the tools to be on all the time. Right? They
yeah,
they sleep with their
yeah,
phone next to them. It
yeah,
pings, and
yeah,
they're answering emails at 2 in the
yeah,
morning.
yeah. I'm very subject
And
to
it, and
that, to be
it's
honest.
it's a yeah, and
Yeah,
it's unsustainable.
yeah,
It's bullshit and it's unsustainable. And I think that if you are experiencing burnout, you really need to seriously consider like
yeah,
taking off a lot of time to recover from that, because it gets worse. Like your body
yeah,
keeps score, and you will start to experience that on a physical level.
yeah,
There's a lot of research to show that burnout is kind of a precursor to other diseases.
yeah,
Whether that's diabetes or other forms of
mhm,
much more serious forms
yeah,
of disease. Heart disease, of course, is the big one. But
yeah,
it's important to take care of yourself. And so if
yeah,
I'm a leader and if I'm inheriting, for example, a
yeah,
team where people are burnt out, the first thing I do, and this is a very practical thing, is I ask everybody to open up the calendar and start to delete all of the meetings. Right. So that
yeah,
it's extreme. I get it. Not
yeah,
everybody's
yeah,
thinking that they're going to do this, but it is a very good way to do
yeah,
that. Take all of your meetings off your calendar and start from scratch, because your calendar tends to be your biggest form of stress, because
yeah,
that's where you see what's anticipated
yeah,
of you
yeah,
and expected of you.
yeah,
By taking everything off, you'll learn a couple of things. One is you'll realize that you are actually saying yes to a lot of meetings that you're not necessarily having an impact on. So
yeah,
maybe you invited to a meeting, maybe there's like a stand up or something that you were on months ago that you're no
yeah,
longer valuable for, and you're just kind of stuck. And now it's like this,
yeah,
routine that you got into. So breaking the habit by removing yourself from that conversation is really important. And then if it's a really important meeting, it'll have a way of finding its way back into your
yeah,
calendar. People will seek you out. Like the way I think about it is quite simply this: is that it's like news. If news is that important, it'll find me. I don't need to go
yeah,
and watch the
yeah,
news to know
yeah,
what's
it's true.
happening in the news.
Yeah,
If it's really important to me and my family,
yeah,
it'll come back in somewhere. It'll
yeah,
find me. So that's the first very practical thing. And then, of course, spending time one on one with people to find out what it is that they need to do in order to make deposits in their account to feel, measured and healthy and creative again, and creating those opportunities. Like you said, one of the things that we used to do with my team at InVision is on a Monday morning, we'd have an all hands style meeting, not all hands, but a kind of like a stand up of my group. And we'd talk about the work ahead. We'd help each other, like, well, what can we do to organize around that? But at the end of the week, we'd have a meeting where we weren't allowed to talk about work, right? This was a entirely social, casual conversation that was about winding down. Like the specific signal that I wanted to send at the end of the week is, I want your weekend to be yours.
Yeah.
Like, so let's start that conversation on a Friday afternoon and start to wind down from that. So immediately start to make sure that people aren't thinking about work, that they're realigning themselves with what's going on in the rest of their lives, so that their weekends truly feel like rest periods. And these are very practical things. Again, we could spend the whole, another hour just
of course,
those things.
Yeah.
But you have to be aware that the productivity metrics that we've created for people, like the number of hours of work, or how many Jira tickets you filled out, or how many meetings you're showing up for, those are just completely off the mark. Right? Now, they have nothing to do with creativity. They have nothing to do with problem solving. They have nothing to do with productivity. So we've really got to kind of change the way we think, and we've got to start to look at impact. We've got to start to look at the outcomes that we're trying to create versus the outputs. And some companies are getting there. There's talk of this, but very few companies actually do it.
Yeah.
So I often, when I'm coaching leaders, when I'm working with design leaders or product leaders, this is where I'm at. I'm like, well, how are you treating yourself? Like, if you're the leader, like Matt, if you were the CEO of a company, I'd say, show me your calendar. Like, what are you signaling to the rest of the company? Because if your calendar looks like a dog's breakfast and you're behaving in a way that looks like you're not taking care of yourself, and you're not getting to the gym, or you're not getting outside, or you're not having relationships with other people, then those are red flags for you, but they're also signals to the rest of the company that that's okay. Right? So you're then, like, if I'm looking at you saying, hey, Matt, you don't look like you're doing the right things, how is anybody else expected to do the right things? Like, you're sending a strong signal that it's okay to be unhealthy and not eat right. And, you're sitting at your desk, stuffing your face with a pizza while you're getting through a meeting. There's something wrong with that signal, right? You really need to be telling your team, take care of yourself and your family, and then come to work as your best self.
I think burnout culture stemmed a lot from the crazy like hiring boom that happened after COVID. I think hiring, especially in design, I think over the last 10 years has progressively been getting more and more, but or increasing. But I certainly think when that period was going well, I mean, in terms of hiring, there was lots of hiring going on. But I think you make it a great point there. I think it's without realizing, a lot of the leaders of the company, the founding members, or the leaders in design, for instance, were actually the ones who were making burnout culture probably not even realizing they were doing it.
In some ways, we even try to make it sexy, right? The culture became
exactly.
I get up at 4 a.m. I go for a run, and then I do a cold plunge, and then I do a meditation, and then I take mushrooms, and it's you're like, wow, how are you getting through your day? And the answer is, you may have been doing that for some period of time, but then it became unsustainable, and so you're perpetuating the myth. But it's a big lie now. Like, people who say that they work 100-hour or 80-hour week, they're just lying, flat out. They're trying to perpetuate the myth because they want other people to think that they're cool or interesting, or they want their teams to work that hard on behalf of them. But those are completely unsustainable. There's not a human being on the planet.
Exactly. And if you looked at measuring the productivity, someone who was actually working that amount of hours versus someone who was keeping healthy, working a healthy amount of hours, I think every time the productivity level would be a lot higher with the person that wasn't working ridiculous amounts of time.
And that's that's what comes with gray hairs, is this wisdom of I used to be that guy who tried to work 80 hours a week. And yes, I did it for a short amount of time, but it did become unsustainable. And now what I realize, wow, if I'm rested and I'm healthy and my relationships are intact and I'm getting fresh air and I'm exercising, that 2 hours of work a day is going to be equal to 20 hours of work in my past life. Right? Like, I know exactly what I need to do to have the biggest impact. Like the
Yeah.
one thing that I can do that's going to really move the needle, that's the thing I'm going to do. And that's
Yeah.
going to have an 80% impact on my day, as
Yeah.
opposed to, the usual kind of bullshit, which is like,
Yeah.
well, if I do these 20 things, I can
Yeah.
tick them all off
Yeah.
and say like, oh, well, I did
Yeah.
20 things.
Yeah.
That actually doesn't really matter. Like,
Yeah.
and you can compare this to athletics, or you can compare it to anything
Mhm.
else. Like, it really doesn't matter how many things you do.
Yeah.
What matters is, did it actually go in the goal, or did it go
Yeah.
in the basket? Like,
Yeah.
it's actually the impact that really matters.
Yeah, yeah, I love the fact you linked it back to athletics or professional sports, right? Because I think the top sports coaches and everything reverts back to incremental gains, right? And incremental gains are often becoming an absolute expert elite at that very small thing that's going to give you that 0.01 second edge in a 100-meter race, right, or something like that. It's not the fact that you turn up to training and did 20 different exercises like half decent or average, but
Yeah.
just because you did those 20 exercises means that you're gonna be
Yeah.
better in the
But
long run.
also, those same guys are like, we're now in an age where athletic coaching has turned its way from like hardcore, you got to start
Yeah.
when you're 10 years old and you've got to be
Yeah.
doing it. Like,
Yeah.
now it's like, well, actually take a lot of rest time. Like,
Yeah.
take 2 months off.
Yeah.
Don't do anything for 2 months. Go and play golf. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of these professional athletes are actually doing a lot of the recovery stuff better than they've ever done it before.
Yeah.
And we're not really absorbing that into corporate life, right?
Yeah.
What does recovery actually look like?